Hey everyone, tonight we are stripped into a snow-muted Ontario bungalow in 1957 and discover how a Canadian woman's quiet effort to lose a little weight touched every breakfast, grocery list, mirror glance and family supper. Settle in now and let the room around you grow a little softer. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day loosen its grip. If you like these quiet journeys into the hidden rooms of ordinary history, you can subscribe and come back another night when another small Canadian life will open its door for you. And if you feel like it, leave a comment about where you are listening from, because there is something lovely in imagining these hushed stories traveling through apartments and farmhouses and city bedrooms, through rain and desert and snow, while night gathers outside. Tonight, though, you do not stay where you are. Tonight, you cross into a small Ontario town in the winter of 1957, into a low brick bungalow with a path of packed snow leading to the front step and a porch light gone dim with frost. The street is quiet in the way Canadian streets can be quiet before dawn, when the snowbank at the curb has turned blue in the dark and every sound seems padded by cold. There is a car in the drive, wearing a skin of ice. There are galoshes by the back door. There are school mittens clipped to a line in the basement near the furnace, and inside, where the heat comes up dry through the register and the windows carry lace-edged feathers of frost, there is a woman already awake before anyone else. You are that woman for a little while. You wake before the children, before your husband, before the day can begin making its demands in full sentences. The house around you is not silent exactly. Old houses and small bungalows never are. The furnace wakes with a shiver. A pipe ticks inside the wall. Wind brushes the eaves. Somewhere in the kitchen, a spoon not set down quite flat yesterday gives the faintest metallic complaint as the room changes temperature. But compared with what is coming, compared with the lunchboxes and boots and requests and crumbs and telephone rings, this is still a pocket of privacy. And in that privacy, there is one object waiting for you. With all the stern patience of a judge, the scale is in the bathroom, tucked beside the hamper and the enamel tub, on a patch of cold floor that steals the heat from your feet in an instant. That is where the day begins. Not with prayer, though some mornings it feels close to prayer. Not with breakfast, though breakfast will be arranged because everyone else must eat properly. Not with coffee, though you want it. The first act is the number. The first act is stepping onto a little metal platform while the house is still dim and hoping that what you denied yourself yesterday has left some visible trace. This, more than glossy advertisements or cheerful magazine promises, is what weight loss really looks like here. It looks like cold linoleum before sunrise. It looks like a woman in her slip, arms folded against the chill, waiting for a needle to stop trembling. When people later remember the 1950s, they often remember the smooth surfaces, shining appliances, trim waists, pails at the throat, bright grocery packaging. But that brightness rests on a great deal of ordinary effort, and some of the effort is so quiet that it barely enters the record. A woman can feed a family roast beef and mashed potatoes, starch shirts, polish the chrome edge of the kitchen table shovel, a path after fresh snow, and still carry all day the private aftertaste of a number she saw before dawn. She may never say the number aloud. She may never say she is trying. She may use the softer word instead. Careful. Watching. Cutting down. Reducing. As though the body were a household expense to be trimmed with tact. So come closer and stay here in this house. Stay with the frost on the inside corner of the bathroom window. Stay with the hand towel, stiff from winter air. Stay with the medicine cabinet, where aspirin, cold cream, and a small bottle of lavender water share space with things less decorative: liniment, bobby pins, a comb with broken teeth, a box of saccharin tablets brought home for tea. Stay with the kitchen table too, because you will return to it again and again. It is chrome-edged, with a pale surface that wipes clean, but never quite loses the faint scratches of years. It is where bread is sliced, bills are opened, children colour, peas are shelled, and calories are counted in secret on the back of an envelope before the paper is folded and slipped away. If the scale measures what you are, the table measures what you allow yourself to have. Outside, the town waits under snow. The grocer will open later. The butcher will swing sawdust across his floor. Schoolchildren will trudge past in bulky coats, the wool of their scarves whitening with their own breath. Churchwomen will trade recipes that promise thrift and goodness, and now and then, slenderness. Somewhere, a doctor will mention watching your weight in the same practical tone he uses for rest and cod liver oil. Somewhere, a magazine on a side table will show a smiling woman in a fitted skirt, not hungry exactly, only disciplined. And you in this house will move through all of it. Not as a symbol, not as an emblem of an era, but as a person whose day is made of very small decisions repeated so often they begin to feel like weather. That is what we are doing tonight. We are not standing far away and talking broadly about Canadian women in the 50s as though they were a category on a library shelf. We are stepping into one ordinary home and feeling the day from the inside. We are noticing how a body is discussed without being discussed, how appetite becomes moralized without anyone saying the word morality, how domestic love can be expressed in pie crust and butter and gravy, even while the woman serving it tries to take less herself. We are following the little rituals that gather around the hope of becoming smaller in a world that still expects you to make everything else abundant. And now the house is still dark enough that the bathroom light looks almost theatrical when you pull the chain and it clicks on. You stand in the doorway for a moment. The scale is waiting. You do not rush the way in, even if the children will be up soon, even if the kettle has not yet been put on, even if there are sandwiches to make and milk bottles to bring in from the cold porch. You take this moment with a kind of tense deliberateness. The bathroom is too cold for dawdling, but the act itself has rules. You step out of your slippers. You nudge the scale with your toes so it sits flat. You glance at the tiny window over the tub, where ferny frost has crept almost to the latch. You take in your breath. Then you step up. The scale is not cruel in any dramatic way. It does not bark. It does not flash red lights. It does not tell you that you have failed. It simply offers a number with the expressionless firmness of household truth. Like an unpaid bill. Like a clock. Like the milk souring sooner than you hoped. Yet because it is so plain, it gathers power. The metal platform is cool. The dial is slightly clouded with age. The needle flickers, wavers, settles. Sometimes it rewards you with £0.5, and that £0.5 can seem astonishingly generous, a gift as real as sunshine after a week of grey. Sometimes it gives you nothing. Sometimes, after a day of self-denial and weak tea and an evening spent smelling potatoes and gravy you tried not to touch, it tells you you are up. Not much. £1. £1.50. But enough to darken the edges of the day before it has even begun. You do not tell anyone this. That is part of the ritual too. Weight loss, in this house and in so many others like it, is intimate without being confessed. It is visible, but rarely named directly. If you are trying to lose, you are not on a program with cheerful slogans or plastic shakers lined on the counter. You are merely being sensible. You are cutting out sugar, taking smaller helpings, walking more when the weather allows, maybe eating fruit first, maybe leaving bread alone, maybe not taking cream in your coffee. The language stays modest even when the feeling is not. The feeling can be fierce. The feeling can accompany you all day like a private weather front, moving just behind the ribs. The bathroom itself becomes part of that feeling. It is not a glamorous room. Canadian middle-class bathrooms in the 50s are functional spaces, often narrow, often chilly, often carrying the scent of soap flakes, damp towels, and furnace heat that has not quite reached this end of the hall. There may be patterned linoleum, a hamper with a lid that does not sit flush, a mirror spotted near the corners, a towel rail hung with washcloths, drying crisp in winter air. In summer, the room will smell faintly of face powder and open window screens and the wet greenness of the yard. But in winter, it feels especially exposing. Your skin prickles in the cold. Your slip clings with static. The mirror is honest in the wrong way at this hour, catching the body before it has been arranged for the day. You look, though. Of course you look. Not for beauty exactly, not in the way a film star might be imagined to look, admiring herself in satin and light. You look diagnostically. You look to see whether the waist of the house dress will sit a little easier. You look to see whether the hips show more sharply beneath the slip, whether the upper arms appear softer than they did at Christmas, whether the line under the chin is behaving. The language in your mind is practical, almost managerial. You can stand to lose 5 pounds, 10 would be better. Best to catch it now. Easter dresses will be in the shop windows before you know it. You do not say to yourself that you are afraid. You do not say that the body can feel like public evidence. You just place one hand at your waist and turn a little sideways in the weak bathroom light. In this, you are not alone, though it often feels lonely. Across the country, in duplexes in Montreal, in wartime bungalows in Oshawa, in prairie farmhouses where snow banks against the porch for months, in Vancouver apartments damp with coastal winter, women are performing similar little ottits of themselves. But the sameness of the ritual does not make it communal. It remains stubbornly private, stitched into mornings before the family wakes. A husband may know in a vague way that his wife is watching her figure. A neighbour may mention she is being good. A doctor may note your weight on a chart and tell you not to let it get away from you. Yet the inward sensation of stepping onto the scale belongs only to you. The tiny drop in the stomach. The bargaining. The temptation to shift your weight, lift your chin, lean slightly back, as if posture could negotiate with metal. Sometimes the scale itself becomes suspect. You tap it. You step off and on again. You slide it half an inch to the left in case the floorboards or tile are imperfect. You tell yourself it must be off because yesterday you had only tomato juice and 1 egg at lunch. But even when you doubt the instrument, the doubt does not free you. It simply gives the morning another layer of unease. You begin looking for hidden causes. Was it the salt in the ham? The piece of buttered toast you ate standing at the sink? The second cup of tea? The fact that you were tired and finished the children's crusts instead of throwing them away? By the time you pull on your housecoat, your body has already become a calculation. Then comes the quiet rearranging of resolve. If the number pleases you, the day feels manageable. You move down the hall lighter, even before any actual difference could be visible. You might allow yourself a certain kind of optimism. You will keep at it, you're getting somewhere. Perhaps that blue dress will sit properly by spring. But if the number disappoints you, you tighten. Breakfast becomes strategy. Supper becomes threat. You begin the day already refusing something you have not yet been offered. And still, beyond all this inward arithmetic, the rest of the house sleeps on in innocence. A child breathes open-mouthed down the hall. Your husband turns once under blankets that hold the night's stored warmth. Boots are waiting by the door to be pulled on later. Socks are draped over a chair near the register where warm air rises. No one else has yet encountered judgment. Only you in the bathroom. Standing in the thin yellow light before dawn, know how much force can gather around a needle no wider than a knitting pin. When you step off the scale, the mark it leaves on the day does not remain in the bathroom. It follows you into the kitchen. It follows you into the cupboard, the bread box, the refrigerator, with its small chill and its enamel trays. It follows you as surely as the smell of coffee or the need to get the children's lunches packed on time. Weight loss in this world is not an hour set aside for self-improvement. It is a lens dropped over everything else, and now, with the bathroom door opening behind you and the hall still half dark, you carry that number toward the room where care and hunger will meet each other all morning long. The kitchen is waiting too. You enter the kitchen with the number still fresh in your mind, and at once the room begins asking things of you. That is the nature of kitchens in houses like this. They are not decorative spaces. They are engines. The linoleum is cool beneath your feet even here. The curtains over the window are faintly lit by snow. glare gathering outside. On the sill there is a little damp where frost has begun to melt at the edges. The chrome trim on the table catches the first low light. The bread box waits. The kettle waits. The frying pan waits. Even before the stove is lit, the kitchen has an atmosphere of expectation, as if it has been holding its breath through the night and can now finally exhale into steam, crumbs, and noise. This is where weight loss becomes especially ordinary, not fashionable, not dramatic, not a private beauty ritual performed in fragrant peace. Ordinary. You strike the match. You set the kettle on. You open the icebox or refrigerator and take out eggs, butter, maybe bacon if there is some for the family, maybe yesterday's porridge for warming, maybe the milk bottle still cold from the porch, and somewhere among these solid, respectable breakfast things, you make a quiet subtraction for yourself. Half a grapefruit. 1 egg, no toast. Tea without sugar. Black coffee if you can stand it. Perhaps tomato juice poured into a small glass and swallowed more dutifully than enjoyed. You do not cook separate special meals with modern names. You reduce within the limits of what the household already is. That is one of the strange truths of trying to lose weight as a Canadian housewife in the 50s. You are expected to feed others generously while disciplining yourself invisibly. The children must go to school properly filled. Your husband must leave for work with something substantial in him, especially in winter when men are still expected to face cold commutes, workshops, offices, shops or factories on the strength of bacon, eggs, porridge, toast and coffee. A stingy breakfast would feel careless. A thin breakfast would feel almost unpatriotic to the household. So you stand in the warmth of the stove and make fullness for everyone else, while persuading yourself that your own hunger is evidence of virtue. You have the grapefruit with a serrated knife. The scent rises bright and faintly bitter, a clean smell that promises improvement more than pleasure. Grapefruit is one of those foods that acquires moral meaning in mid-century kitchens. It is not merely fruit, it is a signal. A woman eating grapefruit at breakfast is not simply enjoying citrus in winter. She is being careful. She is making an effort. She is being an effort. She is beginning again. You spoon the sections loose from the rind and notice how little there really is there when you slow down enough to see it. Yet the ritual matters. The spoon clinks. The fruit glistens under the kitchen light. The smallness of the meal tells you who you intend to be for the rest of the day. Paul. A child comes first, hair flattened on one side, feet shuffling in thick socks, already asking whether there is any jam left. Another appears with yesterday's arithmetic book and one mitten missing. Your husband enters, rubbing sleep from his face, switching almost at once into the practical speech of mourning. Where is the bus ticket? Has anyone seen the scarf? Is the coffee hot? Did it snow again? The radio may go on low, giving weather, farm reports, or news in a steady male voice that seems to come from another kind of world altogether, a world of broad pronouncements and schedules. But here at the table, the true work is smaller. Buttering toast. Counting eggs. Pouring cereal. Wiping up spilled milk before it runs under the sugar bowl. And always, amid this useful domestic choreography, there is the fact that you are hungry, not ravenous yet. Morning hunger is often still civilized, especially if you have had coffee, but it is there in the room with you, made sharper by smell. Bacon in the pan is one of the most difficult things to resist because it is not abstract. It spits, it shines. It fills the whole kitchen with a rich savour that seems to settle into curtains and sleeves and hair. Toast browning is almost as bad, not because it is grand, but because it is grand, but because it is simple and close and habitual. Toast is comfort without ceremony. Butter melting into it can look like common sense, and you are the one holding the knife. So you develop little habits. You cut each slice in half for the children, and tell yourself the edges don't count if you eat one standing up. You decide that crusts from someone else's plate are not really breakfast. You scrape the pan with a piece of bread for your husband and do not lick your finger afterwards. You put your own tea at the far corner of the table, unsweetened, as if distance can help. If you're using saccharin tablets, perhaps from a small dispenser kept near the sugar bowl, you drop one in and watch it dissolve with a faint medicinal patience. Even sweetness is slightly chemical now. Even comfort arrives with rules. The kitchen table holds all this quietly. Children thump their heels against its legs. Lunch money slides across it. A husband unfolds the paper and glances at headlines. Someone complains about the cold walk to school. Someone reminds someone else about indoor shoes. The table is the family's daily stage. But it is also your measuring surface. This is where you notice how much butter is left in the dish and decide whether you should use less yourself. This is where you line up sandwiches to cut for school lunches, generous with peanut butter or cold meat, while your own lunch later may be nothing grander than cottage cheese and canned pears if there are any. This is where the difference between feeding and denying becomes plain enough to touch. Canadian mornings give the whole scene a certain texture. There are wet, warm mittens drying near the stove. There is the smell of snow brought in on boots and beginning to melt on the mat. There are milk bottles, lunch pails, a thermos perhaps, scarves so long they seem to have lives of their own. The children's rubbers leave crescents of slush by the door. The back step is icy. The schoolyard later will be hard-packed with snow. All of this intensifies the domestic expectation that food should be hearty, warming, respectable. In such weather, who would willingly choose less? Yet, that is precisely what you are trying to do. Weight loss here is not a bright summer project of salads and swimsuits. It is a winter discipline carried out in a climate that seems built for potatoes and bread. When the children finally leave buttoned badly, cheeks pink from the cold, before they have even reached the sidewalk, and when your husband gathers his gloves and kisses you distractedly on the cheek with the taste of coffee still on his breath, the kitchen falls into a different kind of quiet. Plates remain. The frying pan cools. Crumbs glimmer on the table. Your own half-grapefruit rind sits like evidence. You stand alone for a moment and look at what is left. One corner of toast abandoned. A spoonful of porridge in a bowl, bacon fat cooling in the pan. This too is part of what weight loss really looks like. Not simply eating less, but being the person who cannot escape the leftovers, the smells, the remains of other people's appetite. You clear the table slowly. You scrape plates into the pail. You wrap sandwiches if any are for a husband's midday meal. You rinse mugs, and the whole while the kitchen seems to watch without comment. It is not against you. It is only full of ordinary temptations. A heel of bread, a biscuit in the tin, jam at the bottom of the jar, cheese ready to be sliced, cold potatoes that would fry beautifully at noon. The house is asking for labour, and labour is hungry work. Still you tell yourself the same thing women have told themselves in thousands of such kitchens. Be good until lunch, then be good until supper, then be good after supper. One careful decision at a time at the same table where everyone else is allowed to want openly. By now the winter light has strengthened. The snow outside is white instead of blue. The day is fully here, and you, already measured, already restraining, begin the long domestic middle of it with your apron tied and your stomach not quite satisfied. Once breakfast is cleared, the kitchen begins showing its deeper layers. Morning noise leaves behind objects, and objects tell the truth very well. The dishcloth hangs over the tap. A spoon rests in the drainer. The bread box closes with that familiar tinny sound. And then there are the cupboards and pantry shelves, which are less romantic than a family meal, and more revealing. If someone wanted to know what weight loss really looked like for many Canadian women in the late 1950s, they would do well to stop here with the cupboard door open and your hand hovering over what is available, affordable, and considered sensible. Nothing on these shelves calls itself a lifestyle. There are no branded powders promising transformation in 12 cheerful weeks. There are no plastic tubs with modern certainty printed on them. What you have instead is the grammar of less. Gelatin packets, soda crackers, tomato juice, Tinned fruit, perhaps in syrup. Perhaps if you are feeling determined, rinsed and drained as if sweetness can be washed away. Cottage cheese when it is bought, because it feels plain and corrective. A jar of pickles, dangerous because they lead to bread and cold meat. Rolled oats. Canned soup. Tea. Saccharin tablets. Maybe a box of rye crisp, or some other dry crisp bread if the grocer stocks it. The sort of thing you eat, not because it delights you, but because it sounds like discipline. The pantry is also a record of thrift, and thrift has its own moral authority in Canadian households shaped by Depression memories, wartime habits, and the long afterlife of not wasting anything. Even in the prosperity of the 50s, comfort rarely erases the older reflexes completely. You save string. You rinse jars. You keep bacon fat in a tin. You turn stale bread into crumbs or pudding. You use bones for soup. You feel the price of butter in your bones even before it rises. So reducing must coexist with all that careful economy. It is one thing to say no to a fresh bakery bun. It is another to throw away half a sandwich because you are being good. Waste and restraint can clash in painful little ways. Sometimes the thrifty voice wins, and you eat what should not be thrown out. Sometimes the reducing voice wins, and you feel guilty on behalf of the household order. You stand at the cupboard deciding what lunch will be, and the decision is never merely nutritional. It is psychological, social, and practical all at once. If you choose cottage cheese and canned peaches, that signals virtue, but it may not keep you full while you scrub the floor or carry laundry up from the basement. If you choose an egg on toast, you may feel steadier, but the bread begins whispering about the scale. If you open soup, you may find comfort in the warmth and salt. But then there is the biscuit tin, and the temptation to make the meal feel complete. Often what passes for a reducing meal is really a compromise between self-denial and the need to keep functioning. The refrigerator, too, offers its own chilly kind of truth. This is not the overflowing modern appliance of abundance without thought. It is a modest humming box with finite space and a certain stern order to it. Butter dish. Milk. Leftover meat wrapped in wax paper. Lettuce, if it is not frozen near the back. Maybe a bowl of set gelatin, clear and trembling, because gelatin has become one of those curious mid-century foods that means both domestic novelty and slimming respectability. It is dessert, but thin. It is treat made permissible by being almost transparent. A woman can eat gelatin and feel she has had something pleasant, while still remaining in the good graces of the scale, or so the era likes to suggest. There may be magazines nearby too, not spread open flamboyantly, but tucked under the telephone table or stacked on a chair. Canadian women's magazines do not need to shout. Their instructions arrive in a tone of helpful companionship. There are recipes for hearty family meals, advice on curtains, hints for keeping house through winter, patterns for children's clothing, and threaded through it all, the recurring message that a woman ought to manage herself well. Not only her home, herself, her skin, her posture, her mood, her budget, her family's nutrition, and yes, her figure. The figure is never wholly separated from character. To be trim is not merely to be fashionable. It suggests self-command. To let yourself go sounds, even in the phrase, like a failure of supervision. So the kitchen drawer becomes a place of tiny records. A clipped chart, a note about calories scribbled from an article, a recipe for a light luncheon. A small pad where you have once or twice written your weight on Monday morning and then, embarrassed by the fact of it, tucked the paper underneath the elastic bands and coupons. These are not the grand archives of public history. They are little scraps that carry feeling. The handwriting leans slightly because you were standing when you wrote it. The paper smells faintly of onion and tea because it lived in a kitchen drawer. The note is not a manifesto. It is one woman trying to manage the border between appetite and appearance with the same practical pencil she uses for grocery sums. Winter intensifies every cupboard choice. Fresh produce is limited, sometimes tired by the time it reaches the store, and often expensive enough that you think twice. Root vegetables are dependable. Apples keep. Citrus feels slightly luxurious and medicinal at once. Lettuce can look weary. Tomatoes in January are not to be trusted. So many so-called slimming foods depend on season and income. Grapefruit is useful if you can afford it regularly. Cottage cheese is respectable, but it is not always more economical than something heartier. Even canned fruit, promoted as light and feminine when drained carefully into glass dishes, costs money. Reducing, then, is never just about willpower. It is shaped by what the local grocer has, what the train brought in, what the family budget can tolerate after coal or oil, shoes, school needs, and church envelopes have all taken their share. And still, amid all these constraints, women create rituals of control. You choose a smaller plate. You slice an apple thin so it seems like more. You decide to have tea instead of a biscuit in the afternoon. You make gelatin in a nice dish because prettiness can help austerity feel less bleak. You arrange cottage cheese with a leaf of lettuce and a tomato wedge if one is available, as if neatness itself might satisfy. The era loves this kind of presentation. If you must have less, at least let the less look orderly. A tidy plate can flatter deprivation into feeling civilized. There is also a subtle class signal hidden in all this. To manage your weight successfully suggests that you are not careless, not slovenly, not defeated by the demands of marriage and children. A well-run household and a controlled body begin to echo each other. Yet there is tension here too, because plenty is also a class signal. A good table says your family is provided for. A generous roast on Sunday, homemade pies cooling on the sill, a pantry not running thin before payday. All these signal competence and dignity. So you live in the contradiction. You want abundance on the family table and reduction in your own reflection. You want the home to look full and yourself to look somehow less so. By noon, the pantry door closes again, but the moral atmosphere of the shelves lingers. The foods are not neutral. They carry little instructions. They promise comfort, caution, temptation, thrift, embarrassment, respectability. A tin of crackers is never just a tin of crackers if you are watching your figure. It is a test of whether one becomes four. A tin of peaches is never only fruit. It is syrup to be drained, sweetness to be negotiated. Even the sugar ball acquires weight beyond itself, sitting in the middle of the table like a tiny white argument between habit and restraint. And so the kitchen teaches you a language that sounds practical but feels emotional. Small helping. No seconds. Just a slice. Leave the potatoes. Easy on the butter. Tea, no sugar. These are ordinary phrases. They are not dramatic enough to enter family legend, yet spoken often enough, or even only thought often enough. They shape the atmosphere of a life. They become part of how a woman moves through her own home, among shelves she has stocked with care, choosing every day which kind of goodness she will try hardest to perform. After the breakfast dishes are done and the house settles into its daytime rhythm, there comes the moment when you must become visible. Even if you are only going to town for errands, even if you are only meeting another woman for coffee, even if the plan is nothing more ambitious than hanging wash in the basement and sweeping the front step, the body still has to be arranged. And in the 1950s, that arranging is not casual. It is another form of management, another place where weight and respectability touch each other in quiet, persistent ways. You begin in the bedroom, where the bed is not yet fully aired, and the morning cold still sits faintly near the window glass. There is the housecoat on the chair, stockings folded with care, brassiere hooks that never feel entirely friendly. The girdle waiting with its elastic promise to reorganize you. A girdle is one of those objects that says more about the era than almost any advertisement can. It is practical and aspirational at once. It does not pretend you have no flesh. It promises only to hold the flesh properly, to guide it into the silhouette expected by dresses, suits, skirts, and the public eye. You step into it with the small private impatience of routine. You tug, you hook, you smooth, you breathe shallowly for a moment. Already the day asks you to be composed. The dresses in your closet are not numerous, but you know them intimately. You know which one forgives a winter pound. You know which one announces itself at church and therefore cannot be worn too often. You know which one sits well if you skip bread for 3 days, and which one tells the truth no matter what. There may be a dark wool skirt for town, a house dress with a print of little flowers, or checks and apron that protects the dress, while you work a better suit, saved for visits and special occasions, perhaps purchased through Eaton's or carefully chosen after much deliberation in a department store where the mirrors are too bright and the sales lady says, "Nice line," in a tone that is meant to reassure but can also wound. The act of dressing is not pure vanity. That is one of the mistakes later generations sometimes make when looking back at neatly dressed women in old photographs. The effort is social, almost civic. To go out looking tidy is to show that you are managing, that you are respectable, that your household is not falling apart behind the curtains. In a small Ontario town, people notice, not maliciously all the time, often simply because that is how community works. The woman at the post office knows who has been looking tired. The neighbour across the way sees whether your coat closes neatly. The woman at church notices if your dress seems suddenly tight, or just as charged in another direction, if it hangs a little looser, and she can say with a smile that you are looking well. You learn how much can be communicated without anyone naming weight directly. You've been keeping busy. You're looking trim. That colour suits you. I wish I had your willpower. I ought to start watching myself after Christmas. These are not insults. Often they are offered warmly, but warmth does not cancel pressure. It only makes the pressure socially acceptable. A compliment on appearing slimmer is not heard merely as a compliment on fabric or posture. It is heard as proof that effort has become visible, that the private discipline of the bathroom and kitchen has made itself legible in the world. Canadian weather complicates this performance in its own way. For much of the year, the body is hidden under layers: wool coat, scarf, gloves, sensible shoes, overshoes, hat pinned down against wind. Winter gives concealment, which can be a relief. A woman can gain a few pounds under a coat, and few will know. Yet winter also gives those dreadful indoor moments. Church cloakrooms, department store mirrors after the coat comes off, a neighbour's front hall warm from the radiator where your cheeks flush, and suddenly you feel large and overwrapped and aware of every layer. Spring can be worse. Spring is when seams matter again, when last year's lighter dresses emerge smelling faintly of cedar and are tried on with breath held in. You look in the mirror before leaving the house. Not for long. 50s domestic life does not often grant women the luxury of long self-contemplation. But you look enough to do the inventory. Powder. Lipstick if you wear it daily, and many do, even for errands, because being put together is part of self-respect. Hair set as well as the morning allows. Collar straight. Belt where it should sit. Belt where it should sit. No obvious bulge at the waistline. A brooch perhaps, something small that says you have not given up elegance merely because the street outside is lined with snowbanks greyed by passing cars. Yet beneath this tidy exterior, there is the inward monitoring that never quite stops. How does the skirt sit when you bend? Can you feel the girdle cutting more than it did last month? Are you standing straighter because you feel good, or because you hope posture will disguise what you think the scale has told on you about? The body becomes a public project in ways that are hard to explain if one imagines only glamour. It is less glamorous than dutiful. You are not stepping onto a stage. You are going to the bank, the butcher, the school, the church hall, the neighbour's kitchen. But even these ordinary spaces have expectations. A woman is supposed to appear in command of herself. Too much fussing over your figure would seem frivolous. Too little attention to it would suggest decline. So you inhabit a narrow lane between vanity and neglect, between being slim and being thought too concerned. That narrow lane is exhausting because it asks for constant calibration and very little open acknowledgement of the strain. When you button your coat at the front door, the whole process temporarily disappears under wool and practicality. The collar rises, gloves are tugged on, the handbag is checked for purse list, maybe ration-like caution, though rationing itself is past. You lean down to pull overshoes over good shoes if the streets are slushy. The mirror by the door offers a final condensed version of yourself. Tidy, decent, acceptable. No one seeing you step out into the cold would know that the day has already included self-scrutiny in the bathroom and self-denial at the breakfast table. They would simply see a woman going about her errands in a well-kept way. And perhaps that is precisely the point. Much of what weight loss really looked like for ordinary women was invisibility. The result, if any came, might be seen. The process remained tucked into private moments. Hooks and elastic in the bedroom, a pause at the mirror, the mental arithmetic of whether a dress feels different at the waist, the secret relief when it does. You carry all this under your coat as you step onto the shoveled walk, the cold catching at your face, the town beginning its day around you. Snow squeaks underfoot. A car engine turns over reluctantly somewhere nearby. Breath lifts white into the morning air. And beneath the layers, beneath the nice coat and the practical shoes, the body you are trying to manage travels with you into public view. The grocery trip is where private intentions meet public reality. In the kitchen, you can pretend that discipline is a matter of choice. In the store, choice reveals its limits. You arrive with a list in your handbag, maybe folded twice, maybe written on the back of an envelope, maybe already smudged because it has travelled through several rooms of the house. The pavement is wet with tracked slush. The windows of the grocery store are fogged near the bottom. Somewhere close by, the butcher's saw has left a fine, clean smell of cold meat and sawdust in the air. You stamp your overshoes on the mat, push through the door, and at once you are in a world of prices, bins, labels, and fluorescent honesty. Stores in the 50s carry a special kind of authority. They are not endless. They do not flatter you with infinite variety. Their limits feel sturdy. There are oranges in crates when they are in season, potatoes, in sacks cabbages with leaves like packed fists, canned goods stacked in careful towers, cookies in tins bacon behind the counter, or racked in paper cheese cut by weight, bread that may come from a local bakery or a familiar national brand, and all of it standing under the jurisdiction of the family budget. The list in your hand is not merely a set of culinary hopes. It is a household strategy, and if you are trying to reduce, you must fit that private campaign inside the strategy without disturbing the family's ordinary life too much. That is harder than it sounds. So-called reducing foods are not always the foods a household naturally bends around. Grapefruit in winter may be available, but not cheaply enough to eat with carefree regularity. Lettuce is delicate and can feel almost extravagant beside a dependable sack of potatoes. Cottage cheese is useful, but only if you will truly eat it and not let it sour at the back of the refrigerator. Crisp breads, diet crackers, tomato juice in cans, gelatin and fruit that seems light enough to count as virtue all cost money. None of it can be bought in a spirit of modern, individualized self-optimization. You do not shop for yourself alone. You shop for children who want biscuits after school, for a husband who expects proper suppers, for lunches, desserts, Sunday dinner, church contributions, and the endless background need of milk, bread, butter, tea. So you negotiate line by line. Pot roast or stewing beef. Bacon or no bacon this week. Apples if they look sound. Canned tomatoes because they stretch. Carrots because they keep. A cabbage because it is cheap and will do several things. Perhaps one grapefruit for each morning. If you are serious, though even as you place them in the basket, you can feel the faintly self-conscious air of the purchase. Grapefruit in this setting announces intention, not loudly, but enough. Another woman passing with a wire basket may glance and understand. She may say she ought to start again herself, after all the baking she did over Christmas. She may mention a friend who lost 8 pounds by giving up potatoes after supper. Advice hovers in stores the way steam hovers near the front windows. The store also reveals class in the most ordinary possible way. The woman who can buy fresh fruit easily, lean cuts without worry, and perhaps a few things that feel modern and slimming has one set of choices. The woman who must stretch every cent has another, yet both are subject to many of the same expectations about appearance. That is part of the cruelty hidden inside the era's polite language about watching your figure. It sounds as though self-control is available to everyone in equal measure, as though all women are standing before the same table with the same options. But grocery baskets tell a different story. Bodies are shaped not only by will, but by cost, season, workload, habit, and what the family will or will not accept being served. You pause at the meat counter and think not only about taste, but about leftovers. A roast means sandwiches tomorrow, and perhaps hash the day after. A chicken may become soup from the carcass. Ham stretches, but salt makes you suspicious now because you've begun connecting salt with the scale's morning disappointments, whether accurately or not. The family wants substance. Winter wants substance. Winter wants substance. Even the stall smells of substance. Coffee, oranges, cabbage, bread, sawdust, cold air coming in each time the door opens, damp wool steaming slightly from the shoulders of customers who have walked through snow. Against such an atmosphere, light eating can feel almost theoretical. And still, you persist in little ways. You buy a tin of tomato juice because it seems like the kind of lunch a careful woman might give herself. You pass by the cookies after a pause that feels longer than it looks. You avoid the bakery display because the smell alone is enough to weaken resolve. Or perhaps you do buy biscuits for the children, and then spend the walk home resenting the tin in your own bag, as though temptation were now travelling under your arm. Weight loss in this period is full of such contradictions. The very person responsible for provisioning the household is the person who must constantly resist the provisions. Canadian stores have their own regional textures, but in many places the social feeling is similar. You know the clerk. The clerk knows roughly how many children you have. The butcher may ask after your husband's cold. The cashier has seen what you buy every week and perhaps what you buy after holidays when everyone is trying to be sensible again. This familiarity can be comforting. It can also sharpen self-consciousness. Buying grapefruit, canned fruit without heavy syrup, cottage cheese, or one of the era's mildly diet-coded foods can feel like declaring private intentions to the whole small machinery of town life. Nothing is said directly, yet everything is legible enough. On the way home, the cold bites through your gloves at the basket handle or through the paper bag pressed against your coat. Snow along the road is streaked with soot near the busier corners. You think through the week's meals as you walk. Monday meatloaf, Tuesday leftovers, Wednesday soup, Thursday sausages perhaps, if money allows, Friday fish, if that is the habit in your house. And threaded through these decent, family-minded suppers is the separate question of what you will allow yourself. Will you skip gravy? Will you leave the crust from the pie? Will you take cabbage instead of potatoes? Will you be able to sit at your own table and not feel punished? Back home, groceries are unpacked onto the same kitchen table that has already seen breakfast, calorie thoughts, and domestic arithmetic. Apples go in the bowl, potatoes under the sink or in the pantry, grapefruit in a neat cluster that looks almost medicinal, butter into the refrigerator, meat wrapped and placed carefully. The physical reality of the week settles into the house. This is what everyone will eat. This is what the budget can bear. This is what winter offers. You stand for a moment looking at the table loaded with groceries and understand, in a way both tender and weary, that being careful is never only about appetite. It is about managing a family economy, a social appearance, and a body, all with the same pair of hands. Weight loss does not come to you only through the scale and the pantry. It arrives in voices, soft voices, helpful voices, teasing voices, professional voices. It comes from pages turned while the potatoes boil and from comments made over coffee that seem casual enough to dismiss and intimate enough to remember for weeks. By the time you are living in a Canadian town in the late 1950s, a woman does not have to seek out messages about slimness very aggressively. They drift toward her through ordinary channels: a magazine left on the side table, a nurse at the doctor's office, a neighbor saying she has cut out starch after 6, a husband, not unkind, remarking that women used to keep their figure better. Advice is everywhere, but it almost never announces itself as a burden. The women's magazines are especially skilled at this. You open one for recipes, housekeeping hints, a sewing pattern, a story to read in the afternoon with tea. And somewhere among those pleasant domestic offerings there is a page telling you how to take off weight sensibly. The tone is rarely furious. It is reassuring, brisk, companionable. Anyone can do it. Merely take yourself in hand. Avoid rich sauces. Walk daily. Eat fruit. Pass up second helpings. Keep attractive while doing so. The body becomes another area of household management, placed alongside stain removal and menu planning. This framing matters because it makes slimming seem less like a personal anguish and more like a respectable duty. If you can master jam making, child feeding and ironing, surely you can master a few excess pounds. But the pages do more than give instructions. They create atmosphere. They show women who seem composed and neat, women whose waists imply order. They pair slimness with freshness, youthfulness, brightness, efficiency. A woman who has let herself go becomes a cautionary phrase that covers many fears at once: tiredness, defeat, neglect, sexual cooling, social invisibility, the slow swallowing up of self by chores and children. No one needs to explain all that directly. The image does the work. The smiling woman in a shirtwaist dress or trim suit is not just a body. She is a promise that domestic life need not visibly cost you. Then there is the doctor's office, which offers a different register of the same message. The examining room smells faintly of disinfectant, paper envelopes, winter coats drying near the radiator. A nurse takes your weight matter-of-factly. The doctor, if he comment, may do so without malice, in the same tone used for posture or sleep. Better not let it creep up. A few pounds off would do you good. Watch the sweets. Nothing dramatic, yet medical language lends moral pressure the dignity of science. Even if the advice is brief, you carry it home as permission to scrutinize yourself more sternly. It is no longer mere vanity. It is health, duty, prudence. A woman is expected to respond gratefully to such guidance, not to notice how thoroughly it enters her inner life. Neighborhood advice has its own texture entirely. It comes over coffee tables with lace cloths, in church basements after meetings, on front steps in warmer weather, over fences, in the grocery aisle, in the minutes before children come out of school. One woman says she lost by taking lemon in hot water first thing. Another swears by cottage cheese lunches. Another says her sister-in-law gave up bread and dropped her dress size. Another confesses she cannot keep biscuits in the house because she has no resistance after 4 in the afternoon. These exchanges have a strange double quality. They are intimate and impersonal at once. Women share bodily worry as a common weather, not always because they are close, but because such talk has become one of the socially permitted ways to admit strain without speaking too openly of sadness or exhaustion. You notice too that the word most often used is not diet in a modern branded sense, but reducing. I'm reducing a little. I ought to reduce after the holidays. She's on a reducing plan. The word sounds practical, mechanical, almost modest. It suggests trimming the edges, restoring order, bringing something back within proper bounds. It does not sound angry. It does not sound radical. It fits neatly into a culture that values restraint, understatement, and good management. Yet beneath that modest word can lie powerful feeling, shame, determination, fear of aging, fear of being judged, the memory of a husband's stray remark, the wish to fit into a better dress before Easter. the hope of looking like oneself again after babies. In Canada, the advice also bends around climate and routine. Walking is recommended, but walking in January along streets banked with snow and slick with packed slush is not the same as taking a pleasant constitutional through a mild spring suburb. Fresh salads may be praised, but winter produce has its limits. A woman in a prairie town or northern community hears the same slendering ideals as a woman in Toronto, yet her daily reality may include harsher cold, heavier meals, longer distances, less variety at the store. The national texture matters here. It shapes what being careful can actually mean. Often it means not adopting some entirely new way of eating, but simply making ordinary household food arrangements slightly more austere for yourself. Sometimes the advice contradicts itself. Be slim, but also be rosy and well. Eat lightly, but keep up your strength. Feed your family generously, but do not indulge yourself. Stay attractive for your husband, but do not seem vain. Accept age gracefully, but do not look matronly. It is easy to imagine women of the 50s as blindly obedient to such messages, but living inside them feels more complicated. You hear the contradictions, you feel them, you may laugh about them with a friend. You may even rebel in small private ways, cutting yourself a piece of cake at a church social and refusing to apologize. Yet the atmosphere remains powerful because it is woven into so many respectable forms of guidance. The result is a peculiar emotional climate. You are never entirely alone in trying to lose weight because so many women around you are watching themselves too. Yet you are also not truly accompanied because each woman's effort is framed as an individual test of character. If she succeeds, it proves discipline. If she fails, she is supposed to correct herself more firmly. Structural things like fatigue, money, childbirth, menopause, loneliness, inherited body shape, or the sheer demand of feeding others do not easily enter the official script. The official script remains tidy. Be sensible, be moderate, be cheerful about it, and so the voices accumulate inside you. The magazine page. The doctor's remark, the friend's little formula, the neighbour's compliment when you lose a few pounds, the cautionary talk about another woman who has grown stout. The voice of the era rarely shouts. It does not need to. It settles in layers, like dust on a sideboard or steam on a kitchen window. Before long, it sounds almost like your own thought. That is perhaps the most intimate power of it. You stand at the sink, sleeves rolled, washing lettuce or peeling carrots, and hear within yourself not a tyrant but a reasonable little murmur. You know you should be careful. You know better. You know what you ought to do. And because the voice sounds so reasonable, it can follow you everywhere, especially into the lonelier middle hours of the day when there is no audience, only you, the quiet house, and whatever is left on the table. By midday, the house feels different. Morning has edges, noon has a blur. The children are at school. Your husband is away. The street outside is quieter. The sounds more intermittent now. A truck shifting gears. A dog barking somewhere far enough to sound muffled. The slap of a rug being shaken on a back line. The occasional crunch of boots on snow. Inside, the kitchen is yours in a way that is almost peaceful. Except that peace can shade easily into loneliness. This is one of the hours history often misses because nothing spectacular happens in it. A woman stands alone in her own house, hungry in small recurring ways, and tries not to eat more than she has allowed herself. Yet this hour tells the truth beautifully. You make lunch if it deserves the name. Perhaps a leaf of lettuce with cottage cheese and a spoonful of canned fruit. Perhaps tomato juice and a soda cracker. Perhaps a hard-boiled egg, peppered heavily to make it feel more substantial. Perhaps leftovers carefully portioned into something that looks meagre on the plate, but impressive enough to count as lunch. You sit at the kitchen table where everyone else ate more heartily in the morning. The room is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock over the stove. Winter light pools pale across the chrome edge of the table. You can hear the house settle. Eating alone changes everything. Food without company becomes more revealing. There is no need to smile and seem satisfied, no need to pass dishes, no need to keep conversation moving. You take small bites and discover whether you are actually hungry or merely obedient to the idea that lunch should occur. Some days, the carefully chosen meal feels almost virtuous enough to nourish you. Other days it feels thin and slightly humiliating. Not because no one has denied you pleasure, but because you have done it to yourself in the name of improvement. You do not dramatize this. You finish your plate, you clear it, you rinse the fork. Still, the feeling remains delicate and unmistakable. Then the housework resumes, and this is where appetite becomes knotted with fatigue. You strip beds, you shake out sheets, you carry laundry down to the basement where the air smells of cement, soap, and furnace heat. Perhaps there is a wringer washer, perhaps lines strung in winter over the furnace room, where shirts and children's socks dry in a warm, dusty breeze. Perhaps there is an ironing board set up in the dining room or kitchen corner. Mid-century domestic labour is full body work. You bend, lift, scrub, wring, hang, fold. A woman trying to reduce is not living in a fitness culture that distinguishes exercise neatly from chores. The chores are the movement. The chores are the drain, and because the work is repetitive, the mind begins to circle around small comforts. A crust left from breakfast, half a biscuit in the tin, a slice of cheddar while standing at the counter, spoonfuls taken while cooking later in the day. This is where many reducing plans falter, not in grand excess but in tiny unrecorded nibbles. A child's unfinished sandwich corner, a bite of cold potato, a lick of jam from a spoon before it is washed. Nothing that would count as a meal. Everything that counts by evening in the strange arithmetic of guilt. The worst part is not the calories, though you may think about them. The worst part is the secrecy of it. You were being good. Then you were tired. Then you ate without ceremony, without pleasure even. And now the act feels furtive, as though you have betrayed not just a plan, but a version of yourself you wanted to be. The kitchen encourages this kind of half-hunger. It is too intimate with your labour. You cannot keep away from it because the whole household depends on your repeated returns. There are vegetables to prepare, dishes to put away, bread to slice, apples to peel, tea to make, supper to begin planning by 3. If there is meat to thaw or pastry to mix, the room becomes both workplace and temptation, duty and trial. A man away at work may have lunch and move on. A woman at home circles food all day, without the clean boundaries of beginning and end. Weight loss under such conditions is not just restraint. It is endurance in close quarters. There is loneliness in this too, and loneliness has appetite of its own. Not always for food exactly, though food is the nearest comfort available. Sometimes what you want is a pause that belongs only to you. Sometimes what you want is praise. Sometimes what you want is to sit with a cup of tea and not feel that every minute must justify itself in visible household order. But the culture does not encourage women to describe such wants with much seriousness. It is easier to say you are peckish, easier to say you are having a bit of a hard time keeping to it. Easier to laugh that you have no willpower around biscuits. Appetite becomes the acceptable language for other hungers too. If you have a radio on in the afternoon, it keeps you company in that gentle, half-distracting way radios do. A voice reads recipes, dramas unfold, songs drift through static, advertisements promise freshness and convenience and calm. The room feels less empty. Yet the very hum of companionship can make the solitary eating sharper. You spread peanut butter on bread for the children's after-school snack and feel the thick sweet smell rise. You slice cheese and apples, line up mugs, maybe set out molasses cookies if there are any, and because you are alone while doing this preparation, the line between serving and tasting grows hazy. One bite becomes another. Then comes the inward lecture. Better stop now. You will pay for it tomorrow morning. Winter light begins to lower early. especially in January and February, and with the lowering light comes a particular Canadian domestic melancholy. The kitchen window goes grey. Snow in the yard seems to hold on to light longer than the sky does. The furnace comes on more often. Somewhere a bus lets children off, and soon the hall will be full again of boots, scarves, complaints, laughter, wet cuffs, and the hungry urgency of school day endings. Before that rush arrives, you have this brief in-between hour, and it can feel either like grace or like exposure. The house reveals the shape of your day to you. What you have done, what you have resisted, what you have eaten standing up without really deciding to. This is what no cheerful reducing column quite captures, the emotional texture of domestic appetite. Weight loss is not merely a matter of choosing correct foods. It is inseparable from isolation, repetition, boredom, duty, and the small sadness of doing so much for others while trying not to admit how often you want soothing yourself. You do not think of it in such grand terms. You simply put the biscuit tin back harder than necessary, wash the knife, and tell yourself supper is coming soon, and you must begin it properly. Yet inside that ordinary movement lives a whole world of unsaid feeling. By the time the children burst in, faces reddened from the cold, school boots thumping, voices all at once, you have rearranged yourself into briskness again. The lonely hour disappears as though it never existed, but it has left its trace. It always does. Home is not the only place where food watches you. In many ways, the world outside the home is trickier, because outside you must manage not only appetite, but other people's feelings. Canadian community life in the 1950s is thick with edible hospitality, church suppers, neighbourly coffee, birthday tables, funeral sandwiches, ladies' auxiliary baking, office parties, wedding showers, Sunday visits, Christmas tins kept going until the crumbs turned stale in January. Food is how care moves through the social world. To refuse it too bluntly can seem ungrateful, vain, or strange. Yet if you are reducing, every invitation arrives with a second invisible script running beneath it. How much can you safely accept? And how gracefully can you decline what comes after? Take the church basement, for instance, one of the great rooms of mid-century Canadian life. The folding chairs scrape. The air smells of percolated coffee, floor polish, damp wool coats, and whatever has been carried in from the kitchen at the back. Scalloped potatoes, buns, ham, pies, squares, maybe a gelatin salad shimmering in a bowl, steam beads on the windows in winter. Women move between tables, carrying plates with the efficient tenderness of people who have done this 100 times. Everything about the room speaks of welcome. Eat, sit, have more. You cannot simply arrive with the chilly vocabulary of personal restriction and expect the atmosphere to bend around you. So you learn the art of refusing without refusing. A small slice, thank you. No, that's lovely. Truly, I've had enough. Just coffee for me. I'm still full from dinner. I really mustn't. The phrasing matters. Direct self-denial can sound superior, as if you are setting yourself apart from ordinary enjoyment. Better to make your limit sound temporary, accidental, light. Better to smile. Better still to accept one small thing and eat it slowly so no one presses another on you. This is one reason social eating becomes so exhausting. It is not only temptation, it is diplomacy. Neighbours' kitchens present a subtler version of the same challenge. You stop in for coffee, and before you know it, the table has a plate of date squares, or butter tarts or soda crackers with cheese. Someone says, "You must have something." And of course you must, because must here means not hunger, but fellowship. To refuse entirely is to reject the host's gesture, yet each bite carries all the private weight of your bathroom scale and your kitchen resolutions. Often what stings is not the food itself, but the sudden sense that other people's ease with food is a language you no longer speak fluently. They take, you calculate, they enjoy, you monitor, you laugh and chat, and stir your coffee while inwardly counting. There are also the comments, never always malicious, Sometimes affectionate, sometimes clumsy, always memorable. Someone says you are looking well and asks whether you have lost. Someone pats her own waist and says we all ought to be careful at our age. Someone tells a story about a cousin who dropped 20 pounds on a reducing plan she read about in a magazine, then gained it all back after Christmas, and then some. These stories circulate at women's gatherings like weather reports from a neighbouring county. They are not quite warnings, and not quite encouragements. They are simply the shared knowledge that bodies are always doing something inconvenient, always presenting themselves for comment, always measuring the distance between effort and result. The ladies' auxiliary meeting is one of the great theatres of this particular tension. You sit around the long table with other women of the congregation. The minister's wife impeccably poised, the older women who have passed beyond the expectation of slimness into a kind of maternal amplitude that the era accepts with something like relief, the younger women newly married and still anxious about how they are settling, the middle ones like you navigating the middle years with practicality and occasionally fierce private feeling. Tea is poured. Biscuits are set out. Someone has brought a layer cake. The agenda includes the Christmas hamper list and the repair of the vestibule carpets. Yet underneath all the business, the body commentary runs steady as a stream. She's looking very smart lately. Has Ida lost weight? I shouldn't have another, but just a sliver won't hurt. You participate in all of it with the ease of long practice, saying the expected things, eating the expected things, eating the expected small portion, keeping your own arithmetic invisible. Holiday tables are the most complicated terrain of all. At Christmas, at Easter, at Thanksgiving, the refusal of food can seem almost sacrilegious. These are the meals that carry 50 years of family memory in a single dish. Your mother's shortbread, your mother-in-law's mincemeat tarts, the cranberry relish from a recipe written in pencil on a card so old the corners have softened. To say no at these tables is to refuse more than calories. It is to refuse belonging, continuity, the texture of being part of something larger than appetite. Yet here, too, the reducing project travels with you, tucked behind the good manners and the genuine warmth, making the table into a kind of arithmetic as much as a feast. What you learn after enough occasions is that the art of refusal in community life is really an art of invisible management. You eat enough to seem normal. You enjoy enough to seem gracious. You refuse just enough to honor your private project without making anyone else uncomfortable. The skill is in the calibration. Too much refusal, and you seem either vain or unwell. Too little, and the scale punishes you. Most women who are watching themselves in this era have developed an extraordinary fluency in this performance. They can sit at almost any table, eat what seems natural, and still have made 20 small decisions no one noticed. And sometimes, in spite of everything, you simply eat the butter tart. You eat it because it is good and you're tired of calculating and the afternoon is grey and the women around you are friendly and it is February and Canada is cold and there will be other days for the scale to offer its stern opinion. These moments of surrender feel like failure and sometimes also like clarity, like remembering briefly what it felt like before every meal carried this second weight. But the moments pass and the morning comes again, and the bathroom scale waits beside the hamper with its usual cold patience. Community, then, is not a relief from the reducing project. It is another arena in which it must be managed, another room where the body is both personal and social, both private decision and public statement. The church hall and the neighbour's kitchen are just the bathroom and the pantry dressed in company manners. The judgment is still there. Only the politeness has changed. Evening arrives and rearranges the house. The children are home and fed their after-school bread and butter or their milk and crackers. Your husband has come in from work, shaken snow from his coat, set his briefcase or lunch pail by the door. The radio gives 6 o'clock news in a voice that makes distant events feel manageable. The house is warm, the windows dark, the kitchen occupied with the serious work of supper. And here, at the end of this long, careful day, the deepest contradiction of the whole reducing project reveals itself most plainly. Supper is the meal that must not fail. The other meals can be quiet, improvised, modest. Breakfast is hurried. Lunch is private, eaten in the silence of the empty house. But supper is the family's shared meal, the daily ceremony that says everyone has returned. The day is done. This household is a household, and to be the woman at its center means feeding others the full measure of nourishment and love that the culture expects. It means potatoes. It means gravy. It means meat prepared with care. It means a dessert if there is one, pie or pudding or a square cut from a pan, served with something warm. It means abundance, or at least the appearance of it. Even in modest households where abundance requires management and stretch. And you, who have been careful all day, must now preside over it. You have made the meatloaf, or the pork chops, or the chicken pieces. You have mashed potatoes the way your husband likes them, with butter and a little cream, not thin. You have made a vegetable, green beans perhaps, or stewed tomatoes, or corn from a tin. Maybe there is bread on the board if there is still some from the morning. Maybe there are biscuits you made in the afternoon, and the biscuits are good, and you know it because you have been making biscuits since you were 12. The meal is decent. The meal is real. You have put genuine care into it. And now you sit at your own table, in front of your own cooking, and you are trying to eat less of it than everyone else. The mechanics of this are delicate. You take a smaller portion. You pass the potatoes to your husband first, so by the time they return to you, the decision feels already made. You take no second helping and hope no one notices. You cut your meat small and eat slowly, a trick that is supposed to make less feel like more. You avoid the gravy, or take only a thin drizzle and tell yourself it is because the roast is already flavorful. You leave a little of everything, which goes against the thriftiest instincts of the household, but there it is. You are trying to reach a number on a scale that currently reads higher than you would like. Yet across the table, your husband and children eat with the unselfconscious appetite of people who have not spent the day in negotiation with themselves. The children eat with the beautiful unselfconsciousness of children, quickly, messily, with requests for more ketchup or for the jam. Your husband eats steadily and with satisfaction. He may say the meal is good. He may say nothing, which also means it is good, because silence at supper in this house means contentment rather than absence of notice. You say you are not very hungry tonight. You say you had a big lunch. Though you did not. You say it was all so rich and good you could not eat more, which is truer than it sounds, because the food is good and the smell of it alone has been filling you for an hour. Sometimes a husband notices. Not cruelly. Not always helpfully. He may say you should eat more, that you are looking thin, and though this ought to be good news, it arrives with a strange little sting of its own because you are not sure whether to believe him, whether he means it, whether it is the same eyes that once registered a different opinion. Or he may say the opposite, in a tone so casual it is almost worse, that you ought not to have a second helping with your figure. He does not mean harm. Men in this era are often operating from a narrow script of their own saying. What they have been taught a husband might helpfully say, with no awareness of how it lands at the far end of the table where you are trying to eat one biscuit and not touch the second. There are also the children, who have a child's instinct for noticing what is not said. A daughter of 9 or 10 may watch you eat. She may notice that your plate is smaller. She may ask why you are not having potatoes. You say you are fine, that you had a big lunch, that you simply are not hungry, with the easy parental fluency for soft untruths. But the watching registers somewhere. Children are educated not only by instruction but by atmosphere, by the grain of small daily observations. What they are learning at this table, though no lesson is announced, is that women's appetite is managed, calibrated, apologized for, that bodies are projects. That hunger is something to be discussed and justified and sometimes hidden behind a smile and a second cup of tea. The supper table is also the moment when emotional weather from the whole day becomes hardest to contain. If you've had a frustrating day, if the washing went wrong, if the furnace gave trouble, if a child was difficult, if the grocery money ran short, if you simply felt invisible and tired in the way that full-time domestic life can make a person feel, the food at this table carries enormous emotional weight. Eating could comfort you. Not eating can feel like punishment. The potato on your plate becomes a negotiation between desire and discipline that is really a negotiation between the day you had and the version of yourself you are trying to become. Dessert is the final reckoning. You have made it because the family expects it and because baking is skill and pleasure and part of what makes this house a good house. A fruit pie with pastry that flakes at the edge, a bread pudding with raisins. Rice pudding smooth and sweet in its brown-rimmed dish. You serve it. You take a small slice or a small bowl, you eat it slowly and with genuine pleasure, because some pleasures do not deserve the guilt that follows them, though it comes anyway. Or you say no, not tonight, and rinse the plates and listen to the children be excused, and your husband settle into the living room with the paper, and you stand at the sink in the steam of washing up and feel both virtuous and vaguely bereft, which is perhaps the most honest summary of what reducing feels like from the inside at the end of an ordinary day. As the weeks pass, the bathroom scale changes its nature. What began in January as an instrument of hope becomes something more complicated by February, a record, a companion, a kind of silent biographer. It has watched you through bad weeks when the cold kept you indoors, and the baking seemed endless, and the family wanted comfort food, and you gave it to them and ate it yourself. It has watched you through good weeks when the grapefruit appeared every morning without resistance, and the cottage cheese did not feel like penance. It has charted the unpredictable geography of a body living through winter in Canada, the pound that appeared after Christmas and stayed through January despite everything, the 3 pounds that vanished in a single February week, for no reason. You could identify and then crept back with Thor. A scale in daily use becomes intimate in a way that surprises people when they think about it carefully. It knows things no one else knows. It knows the weight of a winter illness, when the appetite disappears and the number drops, and for a few days you step on with the strange guilty relief of having lost without trying. It knows the weight of the days just before your time of month, when the body holds water and the number climbs for reasons that have nothing to do with potatoes or gravy, but feel at 5 in the morning, like a personal failure. It knows the weight of a hopeful week when every small sacrifice added up, and you stood on the cold platform, and the needle rested half a pound below where it had sat for 3 weeks, and you stood very still, as if movement might change the verdict. By midwinter, a woman on a reducing plan in 1957 has developed a relationship with her scale that is not unlike the relationship she has with the weather or with money. She does not entirely trust it. She knows its moods and its inconsistencies. She knows that what it reports in the morning may not mean what it seems. She knows that her relationship with it is more complex than the simple before and after narrative offered by magazine articles. The scale does not just measure progress. It measures everything: sleep, salt, stress, monthly cycles, the particular cruelty of January, the faint hope of approaching March. Canada's winters are long enough to make the indoor body a very different creature from the outdoor one. In summer, there is more activity, more freedom of movement, lighter food, the possibility of a walk that does not require the full ritual of coat, hat, overshoes, scarf. Winter condenses domestic life. The house is smaller when you cannot easily leave it. The kitchen is more central. The furnace heat keeps the air dry, and the desire for something warm and filling never quite goes away. A woman reducing in winter is fighting not only appetite but weather, not only temptation but the particular sedentary intimacy of a snowbound household. The scale understands all this in its silent way. It makes no allowances, yet standing before it, you begin to make allowances of your own. And perhaps that is a form of wisdom. There are days in February when the scale becomes a witness, not to your failures or successes, but simply to your continuing. You have not given up. You have not reached your goal. You have not transformed yourself into the serene, competent woman of the magazine photograph. You are simply a person who stepped onto a cold floor at 5 in the morning and tried again. The needle moves where it moves. You pull on your housecoat and go to make tea and begin the same day you have been beginning for weeks, with the same small negotiations and the same faint, stubborn hope. This is not failure. It is just what life looks like from the inside, without the before and after framing that makes sense only from far away. By late February, there may be a few pounds lost. Perhaps 3, perhaps 5 on a good week. The mirror shows something if you look at the right angle in the right light. The dress that was snug at Christmas closes more easily now. Someone at church mentions that you are looking well. The compliment arrives with a warmth you feel more deeply than you let on, because it means the private discipline has become visible. And visibility means it was real. And reality means the months of cold linoleum and grapefruit and polite social refusals were not simply the invisible suffering of the uncounted. The scale then becomes a witness to something beyond weight. It is a witness to persistence, to the kind of quiet effort that leaves no record in any official history but shapes the interior of a life. The woman who steps onto it every morning in the darkness of a Canadian winter is doing something that history does not always think to honor. She is trying in the way available to her, in the language available to her, to exert some claim over her own body in a world that has a great many opinions about what that body ought to be. There comes a day in late winter when you notice your daughter watching you. She is 9, perhaps, or 10, old enough to observe with the unsettling accuracy of children, but young enough that she does not yet have words for what she sees. She is sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of milk and a biscuit doing homework or drawing, and she watches you have a grapefruit, arrange the cottage cheese on the small plate, set your tea without sugar beside it. She watches without comment, the way children watch things they are filing away for later use. And in that watchful silence you feel, perhaps more clearly than at any other moment, the reach of what you are doing. You are not thinking of it as education. You are thinking about whether the grapefruit is sweet enough to be worth eating, and whether the scale this morning gave you reason for cautious optimism. But your daughter is receiving a lesson anyway. She is learning what a woman's relationship with food looks like. She is learning that there are 2 kinds of eating at this table: the eating of the family, which is open and sufficient and unremarked, and the eating of the woman who feeds them, which is private, smaller, apologetic, laced with meaning that cannot be directly named. She is learning that hunger in a woman is something to be managed, not freely expressed. She is learning the vocabulary: careful, watching, cutting down, reducing. She will carry these words with her long after she leaves this kitchen. None of this is intentional. You love your daughter without reservation, with a love that would include her eating every biscuit in the tin as she wanted them. You do not give her the language of self-denial directly. You do not tell her she should watch her figure. You do not comment on her body with anything except warmth. And yet the model is there. Breakfast after breakfast, lunch after lunch, supper after supper. The model of a woman who cooks richly and eats sparingly. The model of a woman who wants and restrains. The model of the body has a problem to be managed rather than a life to be inhabited. In this you are not unusual. In kitchen after kitchen across Canada, daughters are watching mothers arrange small portions, skip dessert, eat standing up, choose the grapefruit, dissolve the saccharin tablet. They are watching the arithmetic of appearance happen in real time, performed so frequently and naturally that it seems less like a choice than like a feature of grown womanhood. The body, they are learning, is never simply the body. It is always also an argument, a presentation, a thing requiring supervision. Grown women are women who have learned to supervise themselves. The transmission is not only downward. You too learned at a table. You watched your own mother. You absorbed her relationship with food and appearance without knowing you were absorbing it, the way you absorbed her recipe for pastry or her particular way of folding towels. Bodies and their management pass across kitchen tables as surely as recipes and habits do. Each generation inherits the anxieties of the one before, sometimes in diminished form, sometimes magnified, always reshaped by new circumstances. In 1957, the circumstances include prosperity magazines that have grown glossier and more insistent, a post-war emphasis on femininity as a private performance of discipline and order, and the specific hush of a household where the woman's inner life is largely managed within the walls of a well-kept home. Your daughter finishes her milk and her biscuit and goes back to her drawing without comment. The lesson continues without acknowledgement, as most of the most important lessons do. By the time she is grown, she will not remember watching you on this particular morning, but somewhere in the kitchen she makes for herself, in the way she stands at the counter, in the voice she uses when she says she is trying to be good, in the small internal negotiations she conducts at every table she sits at for the rest of her life. A part of this morning will be present, not as memory, but as weather, not as instruction, but as inheritance. This is one of the most profound things that ordinary domestic life contains. The unspoken curriculum of the kitchen table. The lessons taught not by intention, but by repetition. The values that passed not through words, but through 1,000 ordinary acts. The half portion, the saccharine tablet. The grapefruit before the kettle even sings. These are the quiet texts by which women have been educated about their bodies for generations, and they pass from mother to daughter with a tenderness and an unconscious fidelity that makes them very hard to interrupt. There is a point in late winter when the house itself begins to feel like a document. You have been living inside this reducing project for weeks now, and its traces are everywhere. Not dramatically, not in anything a stranger would notice, but in ways that are plain to you. The kitchen drawer holds the folded calorie note still, smoothed once and refolded, alongside the elastic bands and the birthday candles and the old grocery receipts. The bathroom scale sits in its particular spot beside the hamper, worn at one corner where your foot finds it every morning. The pantry shelf has its specific grammar: grapefruit, cottage cheese, saccharin, tomato juice, rye crisp in the yellow box. The household has arranged itself around this project the way water arranges itself around a stone, without fuss, without drama, simply shaped by the persistent fact of it. The kitchen linoleum is worn at the points where you stand most often, in front of the stove, in front of the sink, in front of the refrigerator. These worn patches record a body in motion, a body that has cooked and cleaned and carried and managed and served and sometimes denied itself in this small room every day for years. They are a kind of autobiography, not the autobiography you would write if asked, not the one that would mention your name and your children's names and the year you were married. The autobiography of habit, of presence, of a woman who lived here. The chair where you sit with your evening tea, in the corner of the kitchen after the dishes are done, has its own quality of wear. The armrest, smooth where you rest your forearm. The cushion, with its particular compression. This is where you sit when the house finally quiets, when the children are in bed, and your husband is settled with his reading, and the furnace ticks in the walls. This is where the day's effort finally comes to rest. Where you hold the cup and think no organized thought, only feel the tiredness and the satisfaction and the faint persistent wish that things were a little easier. You are not a woman of great complaint. You do not dramatize your situation to yourself. But in this chair, late in the evening, you do not pretend either. You are tired. You have tried. Tomorrow the scale will give its verdict and the day will begin again. Outside, the Ontario winter is going through its last difficult weeks. February is the month when the resolve to endure becomes more purely an act of will than it was in December's newness or January's clean start feeling. The snow is old now, grey at the roadsides, settled into its permanent-seeming winter arrangement. The days are slightly longer, but you cannot always feel the difference. Spring is theoretically possible, but practically very far away. A woman reducing through a Canadian February is not being melodramatic if she feels that the effort is requiring something more than she bargained for. The cold, the darkness, the confinement, the repetition, All of it adds weight to the simple act of choosing less at each meal. Yet the house holds dignity too. Walk through it, and you see not just the evidence of restraint, but of genuine care. The curtains ironed and tied back neatly. The children's drawings pinned to the wall in the hall. The good china behind the glass of the cabinet in the dining room, waiting for occasions. The beds made with tight hospital corners, because that is how you learned. And it satisfies you. The floor swept twice daily because crumbs are not permitted to accumulate. The windows washed inside even in winter because you like the light to come through clearly. All of this is labour, and all of it is yours. The reducing project is only one thread running through the fabric of a life that is, by most ordinary measures, well and carefully managed. This is the thing that gets lost when the era is remembered only as a time of repression and constraint. The women who lived it were not simply victims of impossible standards. They were also people who took genuine pride in their competence, who found real meaning in skill and care, and the beautiful ordinary work of maintaining a home and a family. The reducing project coexisted with that pride, sometimes in tension with it, sometimes flowing from the same source of self-discipline that made the curtains neat, and the pantry orderly, and the supper table worthy of sitting down to. The house holds both truths. It holds the saccharine tablet and the fresh-baked pie. It holds the careful half-portion and the generous roast. It holds the scale in the cold bathroom and the warm chair in the evening corner. It holds the woman who is trying to become slightly smaller, while at the same time making everything around her larger and more full and more nourished. It holds all of this without contradiction, because in daily life contradictions do not announce themselves as contradictions. They simply coexist. The way cold and warmth coexist in a house where the furnace works. But the windows are old. Stand in this house for a moment longer. Before it grows quiet for the night, stand in the kitchen and smell the particular smell of it. Dishwater and toast, faint furnace warmth, the ghost of bacon from this morning, the faint sweetness of the apple cores in the pail. Listen to the sounds, the refrigerator's low hum, the furnace settling in the basement, the creak of the house as the temperature outside drops toward midnight. This is where the story has lived, not in newspapers or medical charts or beauty magazine photographs. Here in this room, in this ordinary light, in the hands of a woman who has been careful and tired and hopeful and unglamorous and real. The night deepens now, and the house is settling into itself. The children are long asleep, their breathing slow and unhurried in their rooms down the hall. Your husband has come to bed, and the sound of steady sleep has replaced the small movements in the news report and the last cup of tea. The furnace makes its low, intermittent conversation with the cold outside. Somewhere a branch taps once at a window, and then goes still. The street, which held children and cars and neighbours' voices all day, is now only snow and dark, and the faint blue light that falls on fresh white surfaces before morning. You lie for a moment in the half-dark and let the day move through you. It was not a remarkable day. No one who lived it would describe it with that word. There was the scale in the cold bathroom, with its usual private ceremony. There was the kitchen and the grapefruit, and the smell of bacon he did not touch. There were the children, the lunchboxes, the errands, the groceries, the long middle hours, the supper table, and all its small contradictions. There was the evening chair with the tea that you made without sugar and drank without regret tonight, which felt like a small victory. The kind that has no audience and requires no announcement. There was the ordinary weight of an ordinary life, carried with ordinary human effort. You do not know yet whether the scale will approve of you in the morning. You have eaten carefully today, by your own standard and by the standards of the era that shaped your thinking. But the scale has its own opinions. It may not offer the half-pound of progress that would make tomorrow feel manageable before it has started. Or it may. You will find out on cold feet in the early dark, with the house still breathing sleep around you. This is how the days proceed. Not with resolution, not with transformation, but with the recurring small effort of trying again and keeping on. The table downstairs, cleared now and dark in the kitchen, will hold breakfast in a few hours. The grapefruit may already be in the refrigerator, waiting with its sharp morning promise. The kettle will be needed again. The scale will need its private ceremony. The day will assemble itself again out of the same materials, with the same domestic choreography, the same hunger managed and expressed and hidden and satisfied in small degrees. Winter will persist for several more weeks, and then very slowly the light will change, and the snow will begin its retreat from the edges of things, and the body will enter the world less concealed, and there will be the question of the spring dresses and the Easter coat, which carries its own kind of hope. But that is still ahead. Tonight there is only the house, and the quiet, and you. It would be easy to see this life from outside and find it diminished. The restricted plate, the private calculations, the careful performance of contentment at the family table. Easy to see a woman shaped by forces she never named, and pressures she never resisted, constrained by the particular domestic arrangement of an era that liked its women neat and thin and gracious. And all of that would be true in its way. The constraints were real. The pressures were real. The morning scale and the saccharine tablet and the girdle in the bedroom were not neutral objects. They were instruments of a time that believed a woman's body required constant management, and that the management itself was part of what made her respectable. But the truth is also larger than that. Here, in this house, is a woman of genuine complexity. She is tired and competent. She is self-critical and also proud. She is hungry sometimes and satisfied sometimes. Unsatisfied sometimes and lonely in ways she has not found a vocabulary for. She loves her children with an unsentimental dailiness that shows in packed lunches and warm breakfasts and the particular way she knows which child is coming down with something before anyone else does. She takes care of things. She makes things work. She holds a household together through the long interior months of a Canadian winter with a kind of durable tenderness that has no name in the public record. The reducing project is one thread of her life, not the whole cloth. Alongside it are skills and intelligence and the quiet satisfactions of a household managed well, of a meal that comes out right, of a child who reads better this term, of a garden that will be planted in April when the ground thaws. The scale in the bathroom does not contain her. The number it shows in the morning is just one of the many numbers that make up her life, the ages of her children, the balance in the household account, the years of her marriage, the distance to spring. Let her rest tonight. Let the scale stand quiet in the cold bathroom, its needle at rest, its verdict postponed until morning. Let the kitchen table be only a table in the dark without arithmetic. Let the house hold its warmth against the Ontario cold outside, and let the woman inside it sleep, without the day's negotiations pressing at her. She tried today. She fed people and managed things and held herself carefully, and did the invisible work that keeps ordinary life from falling apart. She is one of millions of women doing the same work in the same era, in the same quiet way, and history will not often think to look for her. But she is here. She was always here. Sleep now. The morning comes soon enough, and with it the cold floor and the needle and beginning again. Sleep well.